Well, there's been increasing talk about Ukraine being partitioned, with Russia swallowing up the separatist regions in the east of the country. Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kirilo Budanov, says he fears that this is Russia's tactic, having failed to take the capital, Kyiv. Senior Pentagon officials have said that the Russian military is no longer mounting a ground offensive towards the capital. And sure enough, the Kremlin said it would focus its effort on those eastern regions. So what can history teach us about the forced partition of countries? Britain has form in this area. India, Cyprus, Palestine and Ireland were all split in two by our governments in the past. To discuss this, I'm joined by Dr. Hannah Fitzpatrick, an expert in geopolitical partition with specific expertise on the partition of India. Good afternoon to you, Hannah.
Hi, thank you.
And Dr. Shane O'Rourke, who is an expert in Russian and Ukrainian politics. Good afternoon to you, Shane. If I can come to you first, if Ukraine were split in two, how would that be received in Ukraine?
It would go down extremely badly. The vast majority of the country are determined to fight for Ukraine as a whole. From the president down, it seems that there is absolutely no appetite in Ukraine for accepting any form of partition. So that will be extremely difficult to sell to the people of Ukraine, I think.
If it's a solution to the end of war, though, would it be more happily received? And I say happily, that's probably the wrong word, but could it be stomached if it was a solution to the end of war? Or have their hearts maybe been hardened because of what Russia has done to Ukraine? Or they may be feeling emboldened because of the way that Ukraine has been able to stand up to Russia so far, Shane?
I think both of those statements are true. That on the one hand, the level of hatred for Russia now is very great. It's much greater than it was before, and I think that again, there's no willingness to accept that. Nor would there be any faith that Putin would abide by any agreement that partitioned the country. It would simply be, I think, most people in Ukraine would simply see it as a pause before the next attack on Ukraine.
Hannah, let me bring you in here. In terms of past form, has partition worked with regards to India and Pakistan, if we use that example?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by worked. I think at the time, partition was presented as a solution to what was seen to be an intractable set of issues around identity formation and violence, and kind of geopolitical disagreements about what constituted an Indian person or a citizen of India. But in the end, partition exacerbated and amplified many of the issues that it was purportedly designed to solve or to fix. And in fact, the legacies of the partition are long lasting, they're multi-generational, and it absolutely did not quote unquote fix or solve any of the issues that were deemed to be really serious in the 1940s.
Just give me some of those repercussions. So the border was put in place to fix or address certain things. Why didn't it, or why hasn't it worked in the case of India and Pakistan? What kind of hasn't it been successful at achieving?
That's such. There's so many.
Or is that a massive
answers.
question I've just
Yeah,
asked you?
it's. I mean, it's life's work for many scholars answering that question. I mean, off the bat, significant amounts of violence. So the increase in communal and genocidal violence, particularly in the border regions, and there are actually kind of multiple borders that are part of this context. For people from the subcontinent, partition wasn't an event with a beginning and an end. They experienced histories or experiences of violence, dislocation, displacement, alienation from ancestral homes, but also dislocation and alienation from places of religious and cultural significance. So in regions that had been previously unified, where people had access, were able to travel or move about, they were no longer able to move to places of significance for them. So in fact, it actually cut off access for a lot of people. Historians debate about the numbers of people who were killed or displaced, but generally speaking, historians tend to agree that 1 million people at least were killed and 18 million were displaced. This is one of the largest experiences of mass migration in recorded human history. The effects were absolutely catastrophic and changed the demographics and the shape of the subcontinent.
Mm. Are you surprised, Hannah, when world leaders continue to suggest partition as a solution to diplomatic problems? I know that Joe Biden suggested partitioning Syria when he was VP. Tony Blair suggested partitioning Iraq. Does that always surprise you, Hannah, when that's thrown into the mix?
It doesn't surprise me, but it does sort of disappoint me. I think history teaches us that we should be very, very, very careful when we talk about partitioning a region, particularly a region that is away from us, that is somewhere else. So when we're talking about leaders that are talking about a country that isn't their own, I think it's really, we need to be very, very careful. But it doesn't surprise me. I think there's something almost seductive about a partition because it feels on paper quite simple or elegant. So it may seem easy, especially to outsiders, to look at a map and to say that this group of people live here and this other group of people live there. If we just draw a line, maybe everyone will be able to live more happily and easily. But in fact, it's far more complicated. People's lives and experiences are far more complicated and bound up with each other.
Yeah, so a line, a border creates division rather than instills unity. Shane, let's bring you back in here about the kind of Russian psyche towards Ukraine. If it was negotiated that Russians were able to take control of the Donbass region as well as Crimea, how would the Russian people feel about that? Would Putin be hailed as a hero, do you think, for sort of claiming this territory, bringing it back home?
There might be a small bounce in support for him, I think, as a result of that, but nothing like the euphoria that accompanied the annexation of Crimea. And I think once the real costs of this war begin to seep into Russian society, the numbers of dead, if they're anything like even the lower figures of the United States, something like 10,000 dead, then I think the shock to the society will be very profound. And of course, the sanctions are only now just beginning to kick in Russian to Russian society. The effects of them will expand over the coming weeks and months. So I think that overall, this adventure, whatever result finally emerges, has been an absolute disaster for Putin and his regime. It's been a catastrophic error of judgment, both in regard to Ukraine itself and in regard to the West, which has responded in a far more aggressive and unified way than Putin ever believed possible. So I think overall, Putin will get very little from this war, and I think it would be extremely damaging for him and for his regime in the long term, maybe even the medium term as well.
Well, look, thank you to both of you for joining us. Very insightful indeed. That was Dr. Shane O'Rourke, you just heard there, an expert in Russian and Ukrainian politics. And we're also joined by Dr. Hannah Fitzpatrick, an expert in geopolitical partition with a specific expertise on the partition of India. Thank you to both of you for joining us on Times Radio.